This water delivery guy, Park Hun, goes past a playground. A girl sees a coin lying below, and this boy presses it under his foot. The girl says if it is head then it's yours, if it is tail then it's mine. Then the boy looked at it, and it was head. But the boy did not know that it was the head. The girl picks up the coin. The boy tries to snatch the coin from her. Suddenly, he spots her broken finger. Even though the girl is unaware of the injury, Hun quickly identifies the fracture. Taking action, he grabs an ice cream from a child, eats the treat, and repurposes the stick as an improvised plaster cast. Using the girl's hair tie, he secures the stick to support her injured finger. Post-treatment, Hun asks for his fees, but the girl points out that she never requested his assistance. Amid this, the girl's father shows up and escorts her away. The father rushes his daughter, Young Min, to the hospital, where the doctor tells him that her finger is indeed broken, and whoever attempted the makeshift cast did a great job. The doctor then directs a nurse to accompany the patient for an X-ray. However, the nurse guides the father and daughter to follow a blue line on the floor to reach the X-ray room. While struggling to locate the radiology department, they unexpectedly cross paths with Hun, who's there to deliver water containers. As Hun tries to assist them, he notices the father experiencing chest pain. Concerned, Hun places his hand on the man's chest and asks if he experiences breathlessness while sleeping. The father, however, dismisses it, insisting that he is okay. Despite the father's claims of well-being, his visible discomfort suggests otherwise. Before he can be treated, all the doctors are urgently summoned to the emergency department due to a bus truck collision that left 15 people in critical condition. While the medical team attends to the accident victims, Young Min's father begins to lose consciousness. Concerned for her father, Young Min approaches a nurse seeking assistance. Unfortunately, amidst the chaos, nobody takes her seriously, making it difficult for her to get the attention her father urgently needs. Frustrated and desperate for attention, Young Min unleashes a scream, momentarily grabbing everyone's focus. However, the doctors remain occupied with other patients. Amid this, a doctor named Soo Hyun approaches Young Min, inquiring about what she needs. Upon learning about her father's condition, Soo Hyun begins examining him. Unfortunately, another emergency requires Soo Hyun's attention, and she instructs Dr. Kim to take Young Min's father for a chest X-ray and blood tests. Worried about the girl and her father, Hun decides to accompany them. In the elevator, Young Min's father loses consciousness and collapses. Hun and the doctor quickly lay him on the floor for immediate care. Suspecting pneumonia, Dr. Kim hurries to gather the necessary equipment for intubation to stabilize the patient's condition. Hun places his hand on the man's chest and promptly identifies that he's experiencing a cardiac arrest. At that moment, Dr. Kim arrives and starts inserting a tube through the patient's mouth to facilitate breathing. However, Hun intervenes, insisting that the patient is suffering from a myocardial infarction and heart failure. Initially skeptical, Dr. Kim hesitates until Hun firmly orders him to follow his instructions. Upon Hun's insistence, Dr. Kim attempts to listen to the patient's heartbeat and realizes it is indeed a cardiac arrest. Dr. Kim initiates CPR while a nurse fetches the defibrillator. Taking command, Hun uses the equipment to administer an electric charge to the heart, aiming to restore a normal heartbeat. Soon, the patient's heart begins pumping again. He is immediately taken to the operation theater and is prepared for an operation, but the doctors are too busy with the accident victims that they have no time for it. Dr. Kim desperately calls for a surgeon, but no one is available. Seeing this, tears well up in Young Min's eyes. She urges Hun to operate on her father. However, Hun responds that he cannot risk losing his license. As he is about to leave, the girl takes out a coin from her pocket and gives it to Hun as his operation fees, begging him to save her father's life. Seeing distressed Young Min, Hun finally decides to help her. Implementing precautionary steps, he steps into the operating theater. The other doctors quickly identify him as an outsider, but Hun stays strong. As he begins the operation, the onlooking doctors are amazed by his precise cuts that miraculously avoid causing any bleeding. Meanwhile, Dr. Mun, from the hospital, observes the surgery from above. Seeing Hun's skills, he asks Dr. Kim why the patient didn't bleed, to which Dr. Kim responds that he doesn't know. Surprisingly, our regular water delivery guy happened to be one of North Korea's top cardiothoracic surgeons. Despite his ordinary appearance, Hun possessed extraordinary medical skills. There was a remarkable incident when a surgery he performed in North Korea experienced a power outage. However, he skillfully completed the operation, ultimately saving the patient. Despite his exceptional abilities, fate took an unexpected turn, leading him to end up in South Korea. In the present day, Han continues the operation on Young Min's father. Soon, Soo-hyun enters the operation theater and recognizes him as an outsider. She demands he stop the procedure, but Han insists he'll stop only if she's ready to take over. Other doctors support him due to his remarkable skills. The lady doctor suggests to Soo-hyun that they can question the outsider after saving the patient's life. Infuriated, Soo-hyun calls for security. However, before she can guide them in, Han has already disappeared, having completed the operation earlier than anticipated. With security in tow, Soo-hyun searches for Han and eventually locates him. She delivers a slap to Han's face, accusing him of conducting an illegal operation. Han fires back, asserting that she's not one to pass judgment because she abandoned a patient in need. Soo-hyun attempts another slap, but Han stops her, causing her to strike him with the other hand. In the midst of this, Soo-hyun receives a call from Dr. Kim, revealing that the patient is in critical condition, displaying symptoms of polymorphic ventricular tachycardia. Faced with this news, Soo-hyun thinks of involving the police, but Han suggests giving the patient 20 milliliters of magnesium to stabilize his condition, showcasing his surgical knowledge. Meanwhile, Young Min's father receives attention from another senior and skilled doctor in the hospital, Jae-joon. Observing the critical condition, Jae-joon directs his team to administer 20 milliliters of magnesium. Miraculously, the patient stabilizes, leaving Soo-hyun stunned, as the same magnesium treatment was earlier suggested by Han. Even though Soo-hyun acknowledges Han's skills, she insists on having him arrested for conducting an unauthorized surgery. Jae-joon intervenes, telling Han the significance of obtaining permission before operating in a hospital where they are not affiliated. Since the patient's life is saved, Jae-joon releases Han with the condition that he must never return to the hospital. As Han makes his way out, Dr. Mun calls out to him. However, suspecting that Dr. Mun is trying to punish him for what he has done, Han evades the situation and escapes from the hospital. He is running from Dr. Min because he doesn't want to lose his license. Though he doesn't work in a big hospital, he manages to get paid triple the amount of a regular doctor. It is because his patients are gangsters. Because they are wanted, their henchmen are unable to take them to a proper hospital. One day, a patient arrived with an appendicitis. Han began the operation and demanded a substantial sum as a fee. However, when the henchmen tried to attack him instead of paying, he showed them their boss's unstitched wound that would remain open until they paid him. Now, the men were forced to pay Han. Han declined the card payment and ordered them to pay him in cash. When the henchmen tried to pay him half, Han once again inflicted pain on the boss and finally managed to get the full payment. Back to the present day, Dr. Mun attempts to reach Han, but his efforts fall short when Han successfully escapes in his truck. Mun trails him to his clinic and encourages him to join the hospital team. Initially hesitant, Han changes his mind upon seeing a down payment of $50,000. The reason he needed that substantial amount of money traces back to years ago, when Han served as a cardiothoracic surgeon at a military hospital. One day, he was ordered to save a man by giving him a new kidney. The donor was the man's daughter. However, when Han saw a red band on the girl's wrist, he was shocked to his very core. It was the same band he gave to his friend Jae many years ago when they were kids. When he uncovered the woman's face, he learned that the girl was indeed her friend, who went missing after getting kidnapped by the North Korean government. Instead of saving the man's life, Han saved the life of the man's daughter. He fled the area with Jae in his arms, intending to seek asylum. However, his plan went awry when the government turned against him, aligning with the North Koreans who had previously disrupted his life. In a dramatic turn of events, while evading the North Koreans, he found himself cornered. Jae sacrificed herself by taking a bullet meant for Han, and ends up hanging from the railing. In an attempt to save her, Han also got shot. For causing trouble, he was arrested by the South Korean police, which prevented his capture by the North Koreans. Yet, a few days later, he received shocking news. Jae was alive and had been taken back to North Korea. Driven by an overwhelming desire to reunite with his love, Han sought the assistance of Mr. Lim, a person known for rescuing individuals from North Korea. Mr. Lim informed Han that he had located Jae in a North Korean camp, and even provided a video as proof. However, the rescue came at a steep cost. $50,000. Han was struggling with financial constraints until he crossed paths with Dr. Mun. He managed to seal the deal that would enable him to secure Jae-hee's rescue. However, things take an unexpected turn when Chang-yi, Han's friend, informs him that she has seen Jae-hee in the hospital. Han immediately visits the hospital with Dr. Mun and finds Jae-hee there. However, he is unable to locate her. Infuriated at Mr. Lim for lying to him, Han holds him by his collar and demands answers for Jae-hee's whereabouts, saying that he has seen her in the hospital. Mr. Lim responds that he might have seen someone else, because if she was her, she should have contacted her. Reflecting on Mr. Lim's words, Han gradually calms down and exits the store. As he leaves, an unknown person throws money at Mr. Lim, revealing that all orders related to Han and Jae-hee are orchestrated by this mysterious figure. Upon agreeing to collaborate with Dr. Mun, Han receives checks of $50,000. He promptly hands the amount to Mr. Lim. However, a surprising twist unfolds as Han tears all the checks in half, giving only one portion to Mr. Lim. He declares that the remaining halves will be given once the task is completed. With these words, Han departs from the store, leaving Mr. Lim visibly frustrated. Han is finally hired by the hospital, but he and Soo-hyun remain at odds, with him labeling her as a quack and her perceiving him as someone who disregards the law. One day, a patient's condition suddenly worsens and the doctors feel helpless. She had signed a DNR form, meaning they cannot perform life-saving measures like CPR. Han, however, can't bear to watch her die. He desperately uses electric shocks and CPR to revive her. During the procedure, Han notices a familiar band on her wrist, the same one he gave Jae-hee. Eager to find out how she got it, he calls the hospital where she was transferred, but they have no information. Meanwhile, Soo-hyun learns of Han's actions and is furious. Unlike Soo-hyun, Han is determined to keep the patient alive so he can question her about the band. He begins intense practice for the difficult tumor removal surgery. On the other hand, Soo-hyun is seen standing near the patient. It is revealed that the woman is her mother, who left her when she was a child. Soo-hyun begged to stay with her mother, but the woman rebuked her and ordered her to stay with her wealthy dad. Until now, Soo-hyun is unable to understand why her mother left her. She didn't want her to suffer more, so she was infuriated at Han's actions. However, when her mother regains consciousness for a moment and grabs her hand, Soo-hyun decides to do whatever it takes to save her life. She calls Jae-jun, who is also her boyfriend, and begs him to save her mother's life. However, Jae-jun can't help her as he is instructed by the patient's guardian, aka Soo-hyun's dad, not to do her surgery. It is because there are only 5% success chances, and they can't do such a surgery in which they are sure that the patient will die. Desperate to be with her mother again, Soo-hyun turns to Han, handing him the coin as a fee, and urging him to perform her mother's surgery. Han, moved by her plea, agrees to assist. The patient is brought into the operating room, and soon, Han joins the surgical team. Soo-hyun's father, Dr. Oh, who is also the hospital owner, orders Han not to proceed with the operation. Despite Dr. Oh's instructions, Han insists he has permission from the patient's guardian, Soo-hyun. The operation commences, and Jae-jun, Soo-hyun's boyfriend, joins Dr. Oh outside the operating room. Initially, everything goes smoothly until the patient's condition takes a turn for the worse. Experiencing heart failure during tumor removal, she tragically loses her life. Though the operation ends, Soo-hyun is unable to accept her mother's death. Distraught, she starts operating alone, ignoring Han's attempts to intervene. Unwilling to face the harsh reality, Soo-hyun is lost in her grief. In this challenging moment, Han stands by her side, offering comfort and support. Jae-jun, witnessing Soo-hyun embracing Han, feels displeased with the situation. The next day, a meeting is called to discuss Han's actions during Soo-hyun's mother's operation. Jae-jun takes the opportunity to criticize Han, pointing out that the surgery was pursued despite knowing the patient had a slim chance of survival. Acknowledging the mistake, Han apologizes to Soo-hyun. Soo-hyun urges everyone to move forward, accepting that the surgeon did his best. However, Jae-jun refuses to let the matter rest. He accuses Han of performing the operation solely for financial gain. Surprisingly, instead of refuting the accusation, Han admits to the allegation. It appears that he chooses not to reveal Soo-hyun's desperate plea for the surgery. Han instructs Jae-jun to drop the issue. As he is about to leave, Han is stopped by Jae-jun. This time, Han retaliates, accusing Jae-jun of selecting patients based on their chances of survival. Jae-jun, aware of his mistake, remains silent and refrains from responding. After everyone departs, Soo-hyun talks to Jae-joon, telling him that he may be taking his frustration out on Hun due to his inability to operate on her mother. Jae-joon is not happy to hear Soo-hyun taking Hun's side. Later, Soo-hyun visits her mother's home but finds it locked. Soon, she encounters Jae-hee, who turns out to be her mother's previous doctor. Jae-hee introduces herself as Sung-hee and unlocks the door, allowing Soo-hyun to enter her mother's home. Inside, she reveals a collection of photographs of important events in Soo-hyun's life. It indicates that her mother had been observing her all this time. Jae-hee explains that Soo-hyun's mother believed she would be happier with her wealthy father. She feared Soo-hyun would resent her if she didn't give her to him. Hearing this, Soo-hyun breaks down, seeing her mother's face in place of Jae-hee. Jae-hee provides comfort during this emotional moment. On the flip side, Hun receives a call from Mr. Lim, who informs him that he has located Jae-hee. She instructs Hun to meet near his clinic with the remaining pieces of the checks. However, before Hun can discuss further with Mr. Lim, a mysterious man emerges from behind. He shoots a truck, causing it to collide with Mr. Lim's car. That man turns out to be Jin-soo, the North Korean officer. It was under his watch that Hun managed to escape. His superiors accused him of betrayal, cut his finger and kicked him out of the organization as a punishment for losing Hun. Now, he wants to take revenge on Hun, but there is another mission he and Jae-hee are working on. Back in the present day, Mr. Lim is critically injured and urgently needs surgery. Hun rushes him to his clinic and prepares for the operation. Dr. Mun arrives and attempts to stop Hun, advising him to wait for an ambulance. However, Hun, unwilling to delay, proceeds with the surgery. During the operation, he discovers that a rib bone broke and pierced into Lim's heart. Despite the dim lighting, Hun skillfully performs the surgery, successfully removing the bone from the ventricle and stitching the wound. Dr. Mun is astonished at Hun's ability to operate in such challenging conditions, with low lighting and less equipment. Shortly after, the ambulance arrives, and Mr. Lim is transferred to the hospital for further treatment. However, after some time, Hun struggles to locate Lim in the hospital. He inquires the receptionist, but no one seems to know his whereabouts. Just then, Hun receives a message from Lim's number, stating that he is heading to China and won't be in touch again. When Hun tries calling Lim, his calls go unanswered. As the phone is now in Jin-soo's possession, it is revealed that Jin-soo was the one who orchestrated Lim's disappearance from the hospital. If Lim had disclosed Jae-hee's location to Hun, Jin-soo's plan would have been ruined. Suddenly, it dawns on Hun that Chang-yi had mentioned seeing Jae-hee in the hallway. Realizing the facility is equipped with surveillance cameras, he decides to review the CCTV footage to verify Jae-hee's presence. He attempts to access the security room, but the guards kick him out. Upon learning about Hun's girlfriend from Chang-yi, Soo-hyun decides to lend a helping hand. At night, they discreetly enter the security room and zoom in on Jae-hee's face, but the image is too blurry for them to recognize her. However, upon seeing the girl in the footage, Soo-hyun recalls encountering her during the visit to her mother's house. To get a clearer look at Jae-hee, Soo-hyun accompanies Hun to his apartment, where they watch the video of Jae-hee in the camp. Soo-hyun immediately recognizes her as the woman who treated her mother. Eager to learn more, the duo heads to the hospital, where Soo-hyun's mother had been treated. There, they inquire about a woman named Jae-hee, but find nothing. As they stand outside the hospital, Jae-hee walks towards them. Tears fill Hun's eyes, as he can hardly believe that Jae-hee is standing right before him. Presenting the band to her, Hun inquires if she recognizes him. However, Jae-hee declines to acknowledge him, stating that she made the band for her patient. Despite Hun's attempts to jog her memory, Jae-hee shows no signs of recollection. Tired of Hun's persistent questioning, she firmly instructs him to leave her alone. Hun follows Jae-hee inside the hospital, with Soo-hyun attempting to stop him. Unyielding, Hun grabs Jae-hee's arm, trying to trigger her memories. Claiming she needs to check on a patient, Jae-hee excuses herself, leaving Hun disheartened. Soo-hyun remains by his side to offer comfort. She then shows him Jae-hee's social media profile, pointing out that unlike his real girlfriend, this Jae-hee doesn't smile much. As Hun views a photo of Jae-hee with her supposed parents, he's shocked to realize they aren't the parents he used to know. Distraught by the entire situation, Hun turns to alcohol, expressing to Soo-hyun that he will hold on to Jae-hee no matter what. Soo-hyun, feeling a tinge of jealousy, points out that Jae-hee is someone who constantly thinks about her and loves her deeply. In response, Hun questions if Jae-joon loves Soo-hyun the way he loves Jae-hee. Soo-hyun counter-questions whether anyone loves her as intensely as Hun loves Jae-hee. As Hun begins to lose consciousness, Soo-hyun tenderly touches his face, revealing her care for him and possibly hinting at deeper feelings. Witnessing Soo-hyun's concern for Hun, Jae-joon calls her and inquires about her whereabouts. Aware of Jae-joon's dislike for Hun, Soo-hyun chooses to lie to him. Having already seen the two embracing each other, Jae-joon becomes increasingly suspicious of their relationship. Upon receiving a call from Soo-hyun, Jae-hee arrives, but by this time, Hun sees her as a dream and drifts into sleep. With Hun asleep, Soo-hyun decides to take him to her mother's house. As she places him on the bed, Hun, still in a semi-conscious state, reaches out and embraces her as if she were Jae-hee. This moment intensifies Soo-hyun's feelings for Hun, further complicating their emotional dynamics. Observing Soo-hyun and Hun's closeness, Jae-hee becomes jealous and directly questions Soo-hyun about their relationship. After clarifying the misunderstanding, Soo-hyun explains the resemblance between Jae-hee and Hun's girlfriend, helping Jae-hee understand the reason behind Hun's odd behavior. The next day, Jae-joon confronts Hun and demands that he stay away from Soo-hyun. When Hun refers to her as the quack, Jae-joon loses his temper, grabbing him by the collar and warning him not to speak about Soo-hyun in such terms. As the confrontation escalates, Soo-hyun arrives, prompting Jae-joon to release Hun and apologize for his behavior. Dr. Mun discovers what Hun is going through and inquires if Jae-hee resembles his girlfriend. Hun responds that she doesn't just resemble his girlfriend, she is her. To verify her identity, Hun requests another doctor to retrieve her medical reports. Since both of her kidneys were damaged and she underwent a kidney transplant, she should now have only one kidney. Initially, the security personnel refuses to help. Hun takes matters into his own hands, snatching the ultrasound CD and playing it on his laptop. The ultrasound reveals 2 kidneys, clearly indicating that this Jae-hee is not Hun's girlfriend. Despite learning the truth, Hun still smiles at Jae-hee and reminisces about their time together. In the past, he used to embrace Jae-hee and tell her they shared the same heartbeat. Despite discovering she is not his Jae-hee, Hun approaches her and attempts to embrace her to hear her heartbeat. However, Jae-hee pushes him away and reminds him to maintain professionalism. When Soo-hyun questions Hun about his actions, he playfully claims that only 2 people in the world share the same heartbeat and are destined for each other. As a joke, he hugs Soo-hyun, suggesting she might be his destiny. Soo-hyun, who already harbors feelings for him, becomes upset at this joke and slaps him. The next day, a new patient arrives at the hospital. She is pregnant and experiencing unstable blood pressure, significant air leakage, and bleeding. Jae-hee suspects that she might lose her baby if the blood pressure continues to drop. Dr. Kim contacts Jae-joon, informing him of the patient's condition. Jae-joon analyzes the situation, revealing that the patient's lung tissues are torn. Air in her lungs is pressing on her heart, causing a drop in blood pressure. Simultaneously, Hun places his hands on the patient and conducts an examination, arriving at the same conclusion as Jae-joon: a lacerated lung. The critical issue is that low blood pressure jeopardizes the blood supply to the fetus, putting the patient at risk of losing her baby and potential brain damage. Deciding on swift action, Hun opts to perform the operation urgently. Inside the operating theater, Hun initiates a 2-lung ventilation procedure. While outside the room, other doctors praise Hun and his team for successfully stabilizing a patient in critical condition. We return to the operating theater, where Hun becomes visibly frustrated as the patient's blood pressure suddenly drops. Since Jae-hee is an anesthetist, it is her duty to take care of that. When she messes up, Hun gives her a hard time. Soo-hyun intervenes, urging Hun to back off. She points out that it's unfair for him to direct his anger at Jae-hee, simply because she isn't the person he was searching for. Ignoring the tension, Hun refocuses and decides to proceed with a cesarean section. The rest of the operation unfolds successfully. Not only is the woman's life saved, but also the lives of the twins she was carrying. The viewers applaud the team for their exceptional work in saving 3 lives. After the surgery, Dr. Mun approaches Hun and suggests running more tests on Jae-hee to verify if her previous medical reports were accurate. Mun is interested in this matter because he wants Jae-hee to join his medical team as an anesthesiologist. However, upon discovering the potential connection between Jae-hee and Hun, Dr. Mun decides to have her undergo a CT scan to determine if she is a South Korean or a North Korean spy. With Jae-hee now at Hun's hospital, they find it easier to run the tests. A member of the hospital management assists them in executing the plan. Left with no alternative, Jae-hee reluctantly agrees. Once the tests are complete, Dr. Mun secures the CD containing Jae-hee's CT scan. Meanwhile, Jae-hee communicates with Jin-soo about the tests. The man cautions her to be careful, saying that the medical records can serve as important personal information. Later, Dr. Mun summons Jae-hee to his office and discloses their suspicion that she might be a North Korean spy, and for this, they have to check her CT scan. Jae-hee becomes infuriated, rebuking Dr. Mun for accessing her reports without her consent. Han intervenes, calming her down, while emphasizing that her CT scan will be examined regardless of her feelings on the matter. As Han looks into Jae-hee's eyes, he sees traces of his real Jae-hee in them, but the certainty of her being his girlfriend remains unclear. Before Dr. Mun can check the CT scan, he is stopped by Byung Cheol, a former chairman of the hospital and a great friend of Han's surgeon father. Mr. Cheol orders Mun not to see a person's report without her consent, but Han isn't ready to back off so easily. He continues with his investigation. His disappointment sets in when he discovers 2 kidneys in Jae-hee's body. Frustrated, Jae-hee leaves the office. Mr. Cheol follows her, urging her not to report the incident to the authorities. When Dr. Mun and Han apologize to her, she agrees not to file a complaint against them. Han returns to the clinic, and Mr. Choi joins him there soon. He informs Han that he is planning to go to North Korea in a few days to find Jae-hee. Since he was Han's father's friend, he decided to help Han by finding Jae-hee. In fact, he was the one who gave Mr. Lim the video of Jae-hee in the camp. He wanted to give Han hope before giving him Jae-hee, but before he could take her to South Korea, he lost her again. Now, Mr. Choi and Han are unaware of Jae-hee's whereabouts. At this point, Han doesn't want to hear anything from the former chairman. However, Choi is there to shed light on why Han's father, Park Cheol, was sent to North Korea. It turns out there was a malpractice case in Dr. Oh's hospital, and it occurred under Choi's supervision. Park Cheol was determined to expose the hospital's wrongdoing. Choi asked Cheol to overlook the matter, suggesting everyone makes mistakes. However, Cheol reminded him that doctors weren't supposed to make mistakes as they held lives in their hands. Upon realizing that Cheol was steadfast in his decision, Chairman Choi sought to claim full responsibility for the malpractice, as it occurred under his supervision. However, Chairman Oh was more concerned about the future of his hospital. Admitting malpractice could jeopardize their chances of being approved as a university hospital. In an attempt to resolve the situation, Dr. Oh arranged a meeting with Jang Suk-ju, a member of the National Defense Committee, the very man who sent Han's father to North Korea, stating that it was the country's need. Dr. Oh proposed a plan that would benefit everyone. North Korea needed a surgeon, so by sending Cheol there, Suk-ju's mission would be fulfilled. Additionally, Dr. Oh would manage to get rid of Cheol and the malpractice suit. Although Cheol and his son were sent to North Korea, they were never allowed to return. Unbeknownst to Mr. Choi, Suk-jo and Dr. Oh had other plans in motion. Back in North Korea, Han's father made the ultimate sacrifice, giving up his own life to ensure his son's escape from the country. Han struggles to comprehend that his father's best friend left them in another country to face such a fate. Although Mr. Choi was unaware that the father and son were sent to North Korea permanently, he still played a role in ruining their lives. Mr. Choi discloses that he couldn't find Mr. Cheol's body, but did locate his belongings, which he then hands over to Han. Despite his anger towards Mr. Choi, Han expresses gratitude for the return of his father's belongings. He then questions Choi about the fate of the family affected by malpractice. Choi reveals that soon after, the man's wife passed away, and their only child was adopted by a couple in America. Han instructs Choi to go to America and seek forgiveness from the child who became an orphan due to his negligence. Han is determined to find Jae-hee on his own. On the other hand, Soo-hyun's father, Dr. Oh, invites her and Jae-jun to dinner and inquires about their future plans regarding marriage. Instead of agreeing to marriage, Soo-hyun expresses that she likes Jae-jun but needs more time to contemplate the idea of marriage. After saying this, she leaves the dinner, and her thoughts are consumed by Han, revealing her underlying feelings for him. In the meantime, Jae-jun becomes increasingly certain that Soo-hyun has feelings for Han. The next day, the woman whom Han saved the previous day is on the verge of suicide due to the mounting pressure from the hospital to pay the bills. She threatens to harm herself and her children, claiming they will die anyway once they are kicked out of the hospital. Han arrives at the scene and learns from Jae-hee that the twins have cardiac anomalies, making surgery the only viable solution. Han examines the twins' scans and discovers that their arterial tube is almost blocked, and they have a small hole in the arterial septum. Just then, Han is approached by Soo-hyun's stepbrother and the hospital manager, Oh Sang-jin. Sang-jin is ready to involve the police because the patient is deemed a threat to those around her. Han requests Sang-jin's assistance, emphasizing that the babies need treatment. However, Sang-jin is reluctant to bear the cost of their operations. Just then, Soo-hyun calls Han to check on one of the babies who has stopped breathing. While Han attends to the baby, Soo-hyun stands outside the room to ensure that Sang-jin and his security cannot interrupt the treatment. Meanwhile, Han administers mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and performs CPR on the baby. His efforts prove fruitful as the baby's heart starts beating again. The mother breathes a sigh of relief and embraces her baby. Thanks to Han's immediate and effective treatment, the baby is again in her mother's arms. On the other hand, there is a meeting between Dr. Oh's hospital management and Suk-ju, who has now become the Prime Minister of South Korea. Suk-ju has a heart condition and requires a team of skilled doctors for his upcoming heart surgery. Dr. Oh has chosen 2 teams for him, one led by Jae-jun and the other by Han. A competition is set to take place, and the winning team will have the opportunity to perform the surgery on the Prime Minister with their group of talented doctors. On the other hand, Han discovers that the person he will be performing surgery on is the same person responsible for destroying his life and that of his father. Suk-ju collaborated with Dr. Oh to send Dr. Cheol to North Korea. Filled with anger, Han informs Dr. Choi that he will never conduct surgery on Suk-ju, no matter the circumstances. With no motivation to compete against Jae-jun, Han approaches him and accepts his own defeat. However, upon assessing the patient's condition, Han devises a plan. He agrees to participate in the competition only if the hospital covers the expenses of the operation, making it a part of their competition. This arrangement ensures that the twins will receive free treatment from the hospital. Later, Han confronts Suk-ju in the restroom, expressing his anger over Suk-ju's involvement in sending his father to North Korea. Han goes on to threaten the Prime Minister, vowing to carry out the surgery and ensure he doesn't survive. As Suk-ju's security senses trouble, they attempt to break down the door. Simultaneously, it is revealed that the boy whose father died because of malpractice is none other than Jae-jun. He has returned from America, and he aims to settle the score with Mr. Oh. Meanwhile, Jik-soo warns Han about the competition. He orders him to work hard because his failure will result in harm to Jae-hee. It remains unclear why Suk-ju has chosen Han as his surgeon, despite knowing that Han is desperate to kill him. Han attempts to get Jae-hee to admit that they are a couple. Jae-hee seems willing to confess, but Jin-soo keeps a close eye on her, making it difficult. It turns out that after Jae-hee fell into the river, she was rescued by North Koreans and taken to a harsh camp in North Korea. Jin-soo reached her before Mr. Choi and involved her in his mission to assemble a team of doctors for the Prime Minister's operation. The reason why Jik-soo wanted Jae-hee on the operating team remains unknown. Later, Jin-soo informs Jae-hee about his discussion with the Prime Minister. He discloses that the Prime Minister has instructed him to stop monitoring Han. Jik-soo has chosen Jae-jun's team for his operation and wants Jae-hee to join that team. On the other hand, Suk-ju's right hand cannot understand what he is up to. The 2 teams prepare for their upcoming competition, the surgery on the twins. A disagreement arises in Jae-jun's team. Dr. Eun wants Jae-jun to appoint her boyfriend as the first assistant instead of Soo-hyun, but Jae-jun rejects her request. Feeling uncertain about her abilities, Soo-hyun turns to Han for help in practicing the operation virtually. Witnessing them being close, Jae-hee feels a twinge of jealousy. Not only her, but Jae-jun also notices and isn't pleased. He then summons Soo-hyun for a meeting. Meanwhile, Jae-hee approaches Han and advises him to give his best in the competition, emphasizing that there's more at stake than he realizes. Han remains upset with Jae-hee for turning down the role of his anesthetist. He accuses her of selfishness, suggesting that she prioritizes her rest over saving the lives of the babies. Hurt by his words, Jae-hee leaves the hallway in tears. On the other hand, Jae-jun informs Soo-hyun that he has chosen Dr. Eun's boyfriend as his first assistant. It appears he is genuinely upset with Soo-hyun for being too close to Han. Soo-hyun finds it hard to believe that Jae-jun is questioning her surgical skills. She returns to her office, crying over the fact that her boyfriend doesn't consider her a competent doctor. Observing her distress, Han approaches Soo-hyun and offers her the position of his first assistant. On the other hand, Jin-soo informs Jae-hee that he intends to decline the Prime Minister's offer. He plans to carry out the mission as they desire, not in accordance with Suk-ju. Shortly after, Jin-soo and Jae-hee reach a location where they encounter Jik-soo's right-hand man, Tae-sul. He informs the duo that Jae-jun will now perform surgery on the Prime Minister, and they want Jae-hee to join his team. However, when Jae-hee refuses, Tae-sul aims to end her life with his gun. Before he can act, Jae-hee manages to wrest the pistol from him. Now, she holds Tae-sul at gunpoint, while Tae-sul's henchmen point their guns at Jae-hee. Just as the Prime Minister arrives, he agrees to follow Jae-hee's plan only if she discloses her true identity to him. Everyone exits the hall, and Jae-hee shows Suk-ju whether she has a scar from a kidney transplant on her abdomen. Upon seeing the evidence, Suk-ju expresses sympathy for Hun. Regardless, he agrees to give Hun an opportunity to be his doctor. As Jae-hee is about to leave, Jin-soo warns her that if Hun loses, both he and Jae-hee will face grave consequences, including the risk of losing their lives. The competition begins, and Jae-jun's anesthetist administers anesthesia to the baby before Hun's team. Worried, Dr. Mun calls Hun and asks the reason for the delay. Hun explains that their anesthetist, Jae-hee, hasn't arrived yet. The team starts losing hope, but Jae-hee soon joins them. After Jae-hee administers the anesthesia, Hun finally starts the operation. A crucial point in the surgery is when the team stop the heart-lung machine. They have 45 minutes to create the main artery, and failure to do so within this time frame will result in the baby's death. The team completing the process earlier will win the competition. During the operation, Soo-hyun becomes confused due to time pressure, leading her to unintentionally cut a blood vessel. Panicking, she drops the scalpel. 9 minutes have left, and Hun's team hasn't created the main artery yet. Faced with imminent defeat, all Jae-hee can recall is Jin-soo's warnings. Witnessing Soo-hyun's distress, Hun attempts to calm her down. Instead of getting angry, he encourages her to pick up the scalpel again and continue the surgery. However, Jae-jun's team manages to complete the surgery before them and wins the competition. Even though Hun's team loses the competition, they successfully save the baby's life, which is the most important thing for Hun. Since Hun has lost the competition, Jin-soo decides to eliminate him. Just as he is about to shoot Hun, Jae-hee intervenes in time and pulls Hun away from him. It appears she is ready to confess her true identity as the real Jae-hee. Before they can say anything, an announcement of Code Blue interrupts them, indicating a life-threatening situation in the ICU. All the doctors quickly rush to the ICU, where they discover that the baby operated on by Jae-jun is experiencing low pulmonary vascular resistance. He requires another operation to decrease the shunt flow. With Jae-jun's patient destabilized again, it means he loses the competition, and Hun's team emerges as the winner. Hun arrives in the ICU and instructs the nurses to prepare for the operation. Jae-jun sternly orders Hun to stay away from the case, asserting that the baby is his patient and he will perform the operation. The baby is taken to the operation theater, where his life is saved. However, Mr. Oh is upset with Jae-jun for losing the competition. He wanted to get rid of Hun, but now he must keep him until the Prime Minister's operation is completed. Jae-hee confronts Jin-soo and criticizes him for jeopardizing their mission by attempting to kill Hun. Jin-soo counters and makes Jae-hee realize her position, asserting that he will decide whether to kill Hun or spare him. Meanwhile, Hun tries to contact Jae-hee but is unable to find her anywhere. When he spots her leaving the hospital, he follows her in his truck. To his surprise, Jae-hee's car is parked outside his clinic. Upon entering, Hun discovers Jae-hee there, uttering his name as she did in the video. Acknowledging that she is the real Jae-hee, she embraces Hun. Hun doesn't inquire about why she lied or ignored him. All that matters to him now is being with Jae-hee in this moment. After a prolonged separation, the two are finally reunited and celebrate with a passionate kiss. The next day, the couple spends the entire day together. Later, Hun takes Jae-hee to a port and reveals their plan to leave the country. However, before they can escape, Jin-soo's men arrive and surround them. Agent Jin-soo finally discloses his identity to Hun, just before his henchmen knock him unconscious. When Hun regains consciousness, he finds himself tied to a chair. Jin-soo brings Jae-hee into the room and starts torturing her in front of Hun. Despite Hun's pleas for Jin-soo not to harm Jae-hee, the agent goes to the extent of tearing off her clothes. After sending Jae-hee to another room, Jin-soo grabs Hun by the hair and informs him that he will be performing surgery on the Prime Minister. In case he doesn't comply, Jin-soo threatens to harm Jae-hee. He even warns Hun not to reveal Jae-hee's true identity to anyone. After knocking Hun unconscious, Jin-soo meets Jae-hee, who turns out to be part of the plan. Later, Hun regains consciousness and finds himself in Jae-hee's car. Believing he has lost Jae-hee once again, He exits the car and frantically searches for his girlfriend. Unfortunately, he can't locate her anywhere. When he calls Soo-hyun, he discovers that Jae-hee is at a party with her. Soon, Hun joins them and takes Jae-hee aside to discuss their next strategy. Hun suggests either escaping the country or surrendering to the police to avoid Jin-soo's threats. Jae-hee explains that they won't be safe anywhere because the Prime Minister is involved in the matter. All they can do is follow Jin-soo's instructions and operate on the Prime Minister. She expresses that she waited a long time to see Hun again and can't bear to lose him once more. On the flip side, Jae-jun arrives at Dr. Oh's villa and pleads for another chance. He requests Dr. Oh to reconsider the competition and have faith in him for one last time. However, Dr. Oh is too enraged to engage in conversation. While Jae-jun kneels on the ground, drenched in the rain, Dr. Oh remains unmoved and shows no pity. This situation triggers bitter memories for Jae-jun, reminding him of the time he begged Dr. Oh for justice, only to be kicked out of the house. History seems to be repeating itself. As Jae-jun persists, Dr. Oh eventually decides to give him another chance. Hun selects a patient, a 45-year-old suffering from myocardial infarction. The proposed treatment is the insertion of a ventricular assist device, which will function as the patient's heart until a transplant is possible. Unbeknownst to Hun, the patient also has a blood coagulation disorder, making both VAD and transplant unsuitable. It is Dr. John Han's responsibility to inform Hun about this condition. However, Dr. Oh strictly forbids him from disclosing anything about the patient's disorder to Hun. Non-compliance would result in John Han's being expelled from the hospital. The operation begins, and Dr. Oh informs Hun that the patient has no anomalies. However, upon a second check, the truth about the patient having a blood coagulation disorder is revealed. Despite this challenging revelation, Hun refuses to give up and decides to perform a complex surgery on the patient known as Savor. In this risky procedure, the surgeon peels the heart like an orange, removes the dead tissue, and covers the heart back again. Due to its low success rate, doctors rarely attempt this surgery. Given the high risk involved, Dr. Oh and the other doctors are curious about the outcome. As the operation proceeds, Dr. John Han, following instructions, starts to disrupt the surgery. He loosens the blade of the sternal saw. When Hun uses it, the blade comes off, cutting Hun's right hand. Undeterred, Hun changes his gloves and continues the surgery. However, the bleeding is so significant that the glove becomes filled with blood. John Han's wife, Min, becomes suspicious that her husband is intentionally trying to obstruct the operation. She orders him to get out of the operation theater for the sake of their son. With Min repeatedly urging him to exit, John Han has no choice but to comply. Once he departs, Min takes charge and stitches up Hun's wound. With one surgeon less, Hun reaches out to Jae-jun for assistance, requesting another surgeon to complete the operation. Jae-jun decides to send his less experienced surgeon, Dr. Kim, to help Hun, but Soo-hyun intervenes and stops him. She urges Jae-jun to let her assist Hun's team, but Jae-jun refuses. He tells her that she is doing this only because of her liking for Hun, which, according to Jae-jun, is temporary. Despite his warnings, Soo-hyun joins Hun's team. With his right hand injured, Hun decides to perform the surgery with his left hand, leaving viewers perplexed at how someone can conduct such a delicate operation with their non-dominant hand, especially one with a low success rate. Despite the numerous challenges, Hun remains focused on completing the operation. On the other hand, Jae-jun is performing a heart transplant on his patient, which is relatively straightforward for him. Given his prior experience with such surgeries, the team successfully transplants the heart and administers an electric shock. The heart begins beating, affirming the success of the operation. Meanwhile, Hun finishes his procedure, and it's time to stimulate the heart to resume beating. Initially unresponsive, the heart eventually responds after a few electric shocks. To everyone's surprise, the critical surgery proved to be a success. To commend his team for their efforts, Hun hugs each member individually. However, when he reaches Soo-hyun, she tightly embraces him, and everyone notices that her hug is not merely formal. The patient's family expresses happiness over the successful operation, but Dr. Oh is unwilling to let Hun's victory stand. He instructs his son, Sang-jin, to inform the patient's family about Hun's risky procedure performed without their consent. Labeling him a North Korean, Dr. Oh portrays Han as a doctor who recklessly endangers his patients' lives to showcase his skills. Infuriated, the patient's wife demands answers from Han. She is told there wasn't enough time to obtain her consent, but she refuses to accept any excuse. All she wants is for her husband to wake up so she can verify his well-being. Han explains that they cannot wake up a patient immediately after a complex surgery, and that it will take 4 days for him to regain consciousness. On the flip side, Jae-jun's team successfully wakes their patient up after the heart transplant. However, the wife now has more concerns about her husband, going as far as contemplating suing Han for potential harm. A committee meeting is called, and Han is questioned about his actions. Han explains that savor was the last resort, and he didn't have enough time to obtain consent from the family. Despite this, Jae-jun continues to humiliate him, dismissing these explanations as mere excuses. Despite knowing that the patient needs more time to rest, Jae-jun pressures Han to awaken the patient. Suddenly, a code blue announcement interrupts the proceedings. As Han heads to the ICU to check on the patient, he finds Soo-hyun attempting to wake him up. Unable to tolerate Han's humiliation, she took matters into her own hands. Unfortunately, the patient experienced a cardiac arrest during their efforts. Soo-hyun applies electric shocks, successfully reviving the heart. Witnessing her husband's inability to regain consciousness, the wife becomes even more infuriated with Han. Enraged at Soo-hyun for attempting to wake the patient, Han takes her outside and berates her for the reckless action. In this confrontation, Soo-hyun reveals her feelings for Han, explaining that she couldn't tolerate everyone going against him. Han rejects Soo-hyun's proposal and discloses everything Dr. Oh did to his father. When Soo-hyun learns about the suffering inflicted upon Han and his father by Dr. Oh, she bursts into tears. Despite knowing that Han loves someone else, she can't face the rejection. In this difficult moment, Jae-hee comforts her. The next day, Soo-hyun goes to Han's clinic to apologize for everything her father did. Upon entering, she is shocked to see photographs of Jae-hee and Han together, revealing their relationship. Soon, Jae-hee and Han arrive at the clinic and find Soo-hyun there. Realizing that Jae-hee and Han hid the truth from her, she leaves the clinic in sorrow and anger. Han stops her outside, explaining that he couldn't tell her the truth. However, he points out that Soo-hyun should have been honest with her instead of perpetuating the lies. The next day, some goons arrive at the hospital seeking treatment for a minor wound. When the doctors prioritize more critical patients, the goon becomes enraged and starts assaulting a doctor. Soo-hyun intervenes, but the man retaliates by harshly slapping her. In response, Soo-hyun hits him back. Before the situation escalates further, Han punches the man in the face. Amid the confrontation, Han recognizes another goon whose boss he had treated previously. This henchman takes charge and resolves the conflict peacefully. Following the incident, Soo-hyun and Han have a heart-to-heart conversation. Soo-hyun opens up about the difficulty of facing rejection from someone she desires deeply. Han, unable to do much for her, apologizes and offers comfort. Seeing them together, Jae-hee starts crying, possibly believing that her reappearance in Han's life has brought more trouble for him. The competition concludes, and Jae-jun's team is chosen to operate on the Prime Minister. Additionally, Jae-jun is appointed as the next owner of the hospital, acting on behalf of Dr. Oh. Despite the success of Han's patient regaining consciousness, Jae-jun is selected as the Prime Minister's doctor. Later that night, Sang-jin hands Jae-jun a file and instructs him to present it to Dr. Oh during dinner. Upon opening the file, Jae-jun discovers documents about the hospital's new branch. These documents unveil Dr. Oh and his son's involvement in embezzlement and bribery. Jae-jun joins Dr. Oh at the dinner, where Dr. Oh inquires about his and Soo-hyun's marriage. Soo-hyun attempts to convey to her father that she no longer has feelings for Jae-jun, but he signals her not to reveal the situation at the moment. After Dr. Oh departs, Jae-jun informs Soo-hyun that Han is a good person worthy of her love. A celebration party is organized to mark Jae-jun's promotion and his team's selection for the Prime Minister's surgery. However, during the festivities, the police arrest Sang-jin for embezzlement and bribery. As Sang-jin is taken away, Jae-jun encounters Han, who realizes that Jae-jun is the son of the person who died during the malpractice. Jae-jun acknowledges his role in Sang-jin's arrest, Informing Hun that it's just the beginning, Jae-jun approaches Dr. Oh and discloses that the deceased man's son has submitted the financial documents of their new branch to the bank. Consequently, the bank refuses to provide loans and demands repayment of existing loans. Furthermore, the son has spoken to journalists who plan to expose embezzlement of public funds and bribery associated with obtaining the permit for the branch. Despite seeing these impending losses for the hospital, Dr. Oh remains convinced he did the right thing 20 years ago. Upon hearing about the hospital's potential downfall, Dr. Oh experiences heartache. It's then that Jae-jun reveals himself as the orchestrator of these events. Dr. Oh is shocked to learn that Jae-jun had been planning revenge all along. As Dr. Oh loses consciousness, Soo-hyun enters the room and finds her father on the floor, with Jae-jun standing beside him. Soo-hyun, now aware of Jae-jun's true intentions, holds him responsible for her father's condition. While Dr. Oh is taken for treatment, Jae-jun cannot help but feel distressed hearing such hateful comments from Soo-hyun. Despite initially befriending Soo-hyun as part of his plan, he developed genuine feelings for her over time. Thanks to immediate medical assistance, Dr. Oh's life is saved. Soo-hyun continues to accuse Jae-jun of being responsible for her father's condition. However, Jae-jun explains that all he wanted was a sincere apology. In light of the incident, he decides to resign from his job. Instead of trying to stop him, Soo-hyun orders him never to show his face again. Before leaving, Jae-jun visits Hun in his office and expresses gratitude for coming into his life. He shares that he initially became a doctor for revenge, but Hun made him realize the importance of patience in a doctor's life. Although Hun urges him not to go, stating that Soo-hyun will understand eventually, Jae-jun is not ready to forgive himself for his actions and prefers to leave. On the other hand, Dr. Oh regains consciousness and immediately inquires about Jae-jun. Soo-hyun questions why he is talking about someone who left him alone to die. However, Dr. Oh reveals that Jae-jun saved his life by administering CPR. Soo-hyun finally realizes she was harsh with Jae-jun for no reason. She attempts to stop him, but he has already left. While Dr. Oh is recovering, Soo-hyun takes over his responsibilities. On the flip side, Jae-hee confronts Hun, furious that he saved her life instead of her father's. She declares she doesn't love him anymore and wants him out of her life. When Hun reminds her of the good times they shared, Jae-hee bursts into tears and confesses her love for him. She was pushing him away to ensure his safety, believing she was responsible for the problems in his life. The two share an embrace, revealing their enduring love for each other. Later, the Prime Minister's right hand informs Hun that he will perform surgery on the president instead. The situation takes an unexpected turn when it is revealed that the surgery is not for the Prime Minister, but for the president. The information about his health was confidential. Suk-ju orchestrated everything, ensuring that he selected a team of his own doctors. His plan was to have the president killed during the operation, allowing him to take over the presidency. During a meeting with the president, Hun tries to inform him about the prime minister's plan, but he is unable to speak to him privately. When he finally does, Suk-ju interrupts their conversation, preventing Hun from revealing the information. The president attempts to change hospitals at the last moment, but Hun has already taken care of all the arrangements. Meanwhile, Suk-ju vents his frustration on his right-hand man, Tae-sul. Despite Tae-sul's 20 years of loyalty to the prime minister, Jik-soo forgets the sacrifices made and accuses him of jeopardizing their mission. Meanwhile, the owner of the other hospital informs the president that he can only be saved if the saver procedure is performed on him. Recognizing that only Hun can conduct this procedure, the president decides to appoint him as his doctor, much to Suk-ju's relief. During a discussion about the details of the president's CT scan, it is revealed that his condition is more critical than expected. When questioned about the operation's success, Hun admits there are no guarantees, stating that only God can determine the outcome. Amid the meeting, the president experiences chest pain, leading to his collapse. Urgently, he is taken for surgery, and according to the Constitution, the Prime Minister becomes the acting president. Not all members of the cabinet are pleased with this development. Soon, Suk-ju receives a message that the president's surgery has been completed. However, in a few hours, the president's condition is expected to worsen, leading to his death. While the president is unconscious, Suk-ju proudly reveals everything, thinking his plan has succeeded. To his shock, the president opens his eyes, indicating that Jae-hee manipulated the BIS, causing the president to regain consciousness ahead of schedule. Despite this, instead of punishing Jik-soo, the president forgives him, willing to overlook the matter as long as Jik-soo follows his orders. This news distresses Hun and Jae-hee, as it signals danger for them. The Prime Minister agrees to the deal only if he gets Jae-hee and Hun. The President consents to hand over the couple to him. Before Suk-ju can leave the hospital in his car, Jin-soo, pretending to be his driver, shoots him 3 times in the chest, and then escapes. When Hun checks his pulse, Suk-ju is still breathing. Instead of leaving him to die, Hun decides to save his life. The president offers Hun an opportunity to kill Suk-ju during the operation, and in exchange, he will be free to go. However, Hun chooses to fulfill his duties as an actual doctor, prioritizing saving a patient's life regardless of whether they are enemies or friends. A few days later, Jae-hee and Hun find themselves on a bridge when Hun gets shot by Jin-soo, who is still seeking revenge. As Hun is shot again, Jae-hee takes the bullet for him, leaving her hanging by the railing. History repeats itself, but this time, Hun jumps off the bridge and falls into the river with Jae-hee. Days later, Jae-jun apologizes to Dr. Oh for his actions, expressing remorse for the pain he caused. He also seeks forgiveness from Soo-hyun's father for hurting her. Dr. Oh forgives the man his daughter loved, and Soo-hyun forgives Jae-jun for lying to her. However, she acknowledges the pain he went through over the years. The two reconcile, and Jae-jun brings Soo-hyun to meet someone. That someone turns out to be Hun, who is still alive. Jae-hee had gone to China as a refugee because they didn't allow her to be in South Korea, considering her a spy. However, she was granted permission 4 months ago, thanks to Jae-jun's friend. She then applied for asylum in South Korea. As a car pulls up, it is revealed that Jae-hee has finally come to South Korea to spend the rest of her life with Hun. While the two embrace each other, we see Soo-hyun and Jae-jun holding hands, starting a new chapter of their lives.